welcome to another broadcast of Truth Be Told, where we believe in experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio is the one and only Captain Ron. Well, today we have a great show for you. We have the author of The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics, and Ancient Text. And what we're going to talk about today, did ancient civilizations have the technology to use nuclear power? Well, today we're going to talk with author Joseph Farrell about this concept, this research, and his theories today on Truth Be Told. Joseph, after a lifelong interest in alternative history, science, and a fascination for ancient texts, started writing in 2001 on these subjects. And he began his journey with the book Giza Death Star. And we're going to have him back for another show. But today we have in studio, talking about his book, The Cosmic War, we have Joseph Farrell. All right, we are here on Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet, and we have Captain Ron coming in the next hour. But we have a very special guest, and as you heard the intro, a very interesting guest. We have the amazing Joseph Farrell with us. And Joseph, we talked about in the intro, the Cosmic War, and I know for me how I got into being interested in this type of genre, field, whatever you want to call it. But we want to go backwards with Joseph. And Joseph, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so now Joseph, this is an interesting subject. So before we get into the book, I want to know a little bit more about your background, if you don't mind just telling us. I know you were born in South Dakota, Sioux Falls. I'm not going to say what year, but
Thank you.
yeah. But what were you like as a child? Because I know
I was a nerd.
Were you really? Were you a nerd?
Yeah, I was.
Okay. Now, did you do a lot of reading, or how? Because I'm interested how you got on this journey of some of the books you've written, or just, some of them are very connected, and some of them are very opposite of each other. So I'm just trying to find out the connection as a child of how this journey unfolded.
Well, it's kind of a complicated story. I was a big reader as a kid. I've been legally blind most of my life, so that prohibited me from, doing sports and things like that. So I was a reader. I would sit in my parents' basement and just read books, encyclopedia articles, whatever I could lay my hands on. My dad was a construction engineer, and he was kind of interested in some of these topics like the pyramids and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I had read a lot as a kid in some of these areas, and that kind of piqued my curiosity. My academic training is largely in theology.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and when you study, particularly the kind of theology I studied, which was patristics. I did my PhD at the University of Oxford in patristics.
For us normal folks, can you tell us what patristics is?
Sure. Patristics is the study of the writings and doctrine of the church fathers.
Oh.
And that sounds like a very narrow area, but it's actually quite the opposite, because you have to own a lot of philosophy. You have to know several languages. You have to know basically the history of science, history of the development of law, and it takes you up into the Middle Ages. So it's a long time period that you're also dealing with. But as a result of that, you deal with a lot of texts and analysis of texts and, connecting dots. And that's very good training for what I like to do in the books, because I deal with a lot of text and I connect a lot of dots. So.
Right. Well, it is fascinating, and because I think, not necessarily schooling is what molds us into where the direction of what we truly love, unless unless that's just somebody from day one, you want to be a doctor and you just love it. But for people like us, I think it's people that influence around us. It could be a topic that we've learned in school, and one of our teachers just kind of influenced us into falling in love with the subject. So When did you start writing, especially writing books like The Cosmic War? When did you actually start writing books itself?
I started in 2001 with a book called The Giza Death Star,
Mm-hmm.
which was the result of I, at the time, was still a college professor. I was team teaching a course with a professor on weekends, and she had an interest in these kind of topics. And I outlined my theory about what I thought the Great Pyramid might have been. She says, "Oh, you've got to present that to class." So I did,
Wow.
and the class encouraged me to write it up as a book. She encouraged me to do so. A couple of friends of mine encouraged me to do so. So that's it. Began by accident, really. And I continued, when I decided to do that book, I knew that I would probably be doing other books to really round out what I was thinking. And I told myself if the book actually took off, which it did, I would keep writing in that field. And eventually, it just kind of evolved into a full-time full
Wow.
time career. So that's what happened.
Now, okay, so when you wrote the first book, like you
Hmm.
said, the Giza Death Star, and we're showing a picture of that, and please go pick that up because it's an amazing book. Um, did it help you kind of open your mind to other areas than just the pyramids? Because we're getting ready to talk about
Mm,
the amazing book, The Cosmic War,
mm.
interplanetary warfare, modern physics, and ancient text. Now, is there a connection between the two?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I've always been kind of fascinated in these subjects, and I was in graduate school when I first heard Richard Hoagland on the
Oh
radio
yeah.
talking
Oh
about
yeah.
his books, the Monuments of Mars,
Right.
and that fascinated me. So I followed him and his publications. Some of the people that he was associated with, Dr. John Brandenburg in particular, who he mentioned in that first book as thinking that there may have been some sort of war that was fought on Mars. And of course, Dr. Brandenburg has recently, just within the last year, published a paper, an academic paper, which he's delivered in certain venues, I think, for NASA and a couple of other places. So my interest in this subject has always been there. The Cosmic War came about largely because I wanted to, rather than focus on just the pyramid idea of
Mm-hmm.
it possibly being a weapon. I wanted to focus on the wider war itself and what certain ancient texts and textual traditions may have said about it.
Right.
And if you stop and think about it, particularly in theology, you have the war in heaven, Michael and Lucifer and so
Right.
on. But
Right.
but this is a war that really is not simply confined to the Christian tradition. You have a number of ancient civilizations talking about it. The Mesopotamians talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
The Egyptians talk about it. The Greeks with the Gigantomachy and the battle against the Titans, they talk about it. The Vedic texts in India talk about it. So it's all over. So what I decided to do was simply examine some of those textual traditions and see what they say about the cosmic war, and that's where it gets kind of fascinating.
So, okay, when you first started
Mhm.
writing the book, what was your first research? Where did you go to first for your text or just the information?
Well, I concentrated largely on the Mesopotamian texts, in particular things like the Epic of Ninurta. I concentrated on some of the Ugaritic texts. I concentrated on some Egyptian texts, the Edfu Temple texts. Those were my primary areas of interest, largely because other people had covered the aspect of the story. Uh, Many people have covered the Greco-Roman version of it, so I didn't feel it was necessary for me to do that. I wanted to concentrate on lesser known texts and
Right.
illustrate some things that way.
Now, when the lesser known,
Hmm.
does that, because it is lesser known, does it help? I guess not validate it as much as the. I mean, do you have to prove it more true that it is lesser known?
Well, no. by lesser known, I simply mean not quite as familiar to
Oh,
the
okay.
public as
Okay.
at large. Certainly, academics are familiar with those texts.
Okay. I wanted to make
But,
sure. Yeah.
one of the texts I concentrated on was the Epic of Ninurta, which is an ancient Mesopotamian text. And I reproduced that entire text
Hmm.
in the Cosmic War simply for a an anti-academic purpose,
Right.
because of course academics call it the Epic of Ninurta, but when you sit down and read it, it's about as exciting as reading the index to a Sears catalog, because it's not really an epic at all, it's an inventory.
Right. Right.
That's
Right.
really all it is.
Right.
And it's an inventory of a very peculiar nature, because it's an inventory taken, if you read the text, it's taken at the end of some sort of war of the gods. And when you're reading it, what they're describing is a technology. They're describing it as best as they can
Hmm.
in the language that they had at the day. But really, it's an inventory of the victors taking an inventory of the technology of the vanquished. And it's
Hmm.
very interesting, because you have basically four classes of technology if you look at it. And one class of technology is technology they want to destroy. Another class of technology is technology they want to cart off and use in other
Right.
applications, and so on. But there's one class of technology that's very interesting. It's very small in terms of the whole text, but that technology is technology that could not be destroyed, so they hid it.
Oh,
So,
wow. So
yeah.
nobody else will find it.
Oh, yeah, yeah, exactly. So and it's very clear that the technology that they're describing is technology that was used to fight this war. And in addition to that, it's a technology that was obviously a technology of mass destruction of some sort. And the other flip side of that coin is the Babylonian text, the Enuma Elish, which again academics claim is a creation epic. But when you sit down and read the text, I'm constantly amazed that academics can't see the forest for the trees,
Mm.
because when you read that text, it's very clearly not a creation epic. It's a war epic. It's about a
Wow.
war. And again, you have technologies of mass destruction. You have weather weapons talked about in that book, or in that text. You have genetic engineering, bioweapons, and all sorts of stuff being used. So, in my opinion, yeah, it's describing a technology that was used to fight this war in the mists of human prehistory. And again, you kind of have to read the texts themselves, and in the context I try and present them, to get this idea. Yeah, they're talking about a war that was fought, in my opinion, right here in the solar system, and fought with some very, very incredible high technology.
Now, I'm actually showing a picture of the text, and it looks like some of the text were actually erased, destroyed.
Right.
So, was do you do you think there's some information in there that might give you more validation, or do you think you have enough in the text that was there to prove your theory?
Well, I think there's enough information in the text to prove the theory when you read them in the context
Mm-hmm.
of some contemporary scientific theory. Like I say, I try to reproduce as much of those texts in the
Mm-hmm.
book as possible, so that people can read what's being said in context.
Right.
Um, but it's really when you juxtapose that data set with some contemporary scientific theory that you begin to see that the possibility is very, very strong that there may have been a war that was fought, an interplanetary war that was fought in the solar system. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of the theory that was revived by the astronomer Dr. Tom Van Flandern. He used to be the chief astronomer for the U.S. Naval Laboratory. He revived a theory that late 18th and early 19th century astronomers had concerning the asteroid belt, because when they discovered the first asteroid at the turn of those centuries,
Right.
they hypothesized, when they found more asteroids, they hypothesized on the basis of certain astronomical laws known as the Titius-Bode law, that there should be a planet where the asteroid belt currently is. So they theorized, well, a planet blew up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Interestingly enough, they called that planet Krypton. So,
Wonder where they got that from.
I wonder where they got that
Yeah.
idea. Yeah. But Tom Van Flandern revived that hypothesis because he actually ran the orbital tracks of comets backwards in history to discover that they originated at a point within the asteroid belt.
Mm-hmm.
And he came up with two possible dates in his program for when that planet blew up. One was about 65 million years ago, which would correspond with the KT geological boundary layer that you see on planet Earth. The other date would have been about 3.2 million years ago, in other words, much closer to us in terms of history. But the interesting thing is, if you read his book, it's called Dark Matter, Missing Planets, and New Comets. All right. If you read that book carefully, and I review it in The Cosmic War, Dr. Van Flandern proposes a number of models for why a planet would blow up. And the first one he proposes, well, it blew up because of some sort of natural nuclear reaction that took place inside the planet. But then he, being a physicist, he realizes that a standard natural fission reactor, and such things do occur in nature, would simply not have the necessary energy to destroy an entire planet. So then he proposes, well, maybe there was some sort of antimatter containment inside the planet.
Wow.
That broke down and blew up the planet. But again, the problem there is the matter antimatter anisotropy, which means basically that there, for some reason, you can never have as much antimatter in the world as you have matter. So in other words, that explanation really doesn't work either. And so he hems and haws, and finally he gets around and he just comes right out and says, well, maybe it was blown up by some sort of deliberate action. In other words, in a war. And
everybody rolled their eyes, I'm sure.
Yeah, everybody rolled their eyes. But, his real point was none of the other mechanisms are really very good explanations. And the only thing that leaves us with, the old Sherlock Holmes thing, when you eliminate everything else, the solution that you're left with is the most probable. The idea that it was blown up as a result of deliberate action implies a technology. Either a technology that's gone horribly wrong in some sort of accident that is powerful enough to destroy an entire planet, or a technology of weaponry of some sort that's powerful enough to do that. And that's kind of where I take off. You juxtapose those ideas with what the texts are saying. And in particular, the Babylonian texts are very clear that there is a destruction of a planet involved in that cosmic war that they're talking about. So you juxtapose the two, and then you look at the Epic of Ninurta, where it's describing all of these technologies that they're trying to destroy, and you get a pretty clear picture that, yeah, maybe this cosmic war that various myths talk about, we're really recording something real.
Now, okay, the Enuma, or the Epic of Enuma, right?
The Epic of Ninurta.
Ninurta. And then Enuma.
The Enuma Elish.
Elish, okay.
The so-called creation epic.
So it sounds like that there's very similar information in both of them. Could you give us the comparison contrast? What is the information that really blew your mind, that you're like, this is almost exactly the same story or information? And then on the other hand is what was the discrepancies of maybe their own version?
Well, they both kind of blew my mind. In the Enuma Elish, what blew my mind were in the fourth tablet. The Enuma Elish is a cuneiform text that was recorded on 7 tablets. The fourth tablet of the Enuma Elish is really a mind blower, because it's the first clue that you're not reading a creation epic, you're reading a war epic. Because you have the description of this war between Marduk and a goddess called Tiamat. And Tiamat, when you read the text, is deploying all these weapons, weather weapons, it talks about scorpion men, in other words, about genetic chimeras that were created as weapons systems in this war. And then Tiamat is destroyed by Marduk, who hurls his lightning bolt
Hmm.
into Tiamat. But he does so in such a way that indicates that Tiamat began to quake and groan. In other words, if you view Tiamat as a planet, Tiamat's beginning to suffer earthquakes. And the text actually says, and Marduk drew in the final pulse of wind, and Tiamat blows up. All right. And then after that, it has a very interesting statement that Marduk, after this happens, Marduk remeasures the structure of the deep. In other words, if you have a planet blowing up in the solar system,
Right.
that will alter the celestial mechanics
Wow.
of that system. So in other words, the text is very accurately describing something that you would do as a result of a war in which you've blown up a planet. The first thing you're going to do is figure out, how does this affect the local celestial mechanics? So the text, in a certain sense, is quite scientifically accurate. The Epic of Ninurta, on the other hand, blew my mind, not simply for what it was saying about some of this technology, but it very strongly hints that this technology was only capable of being used by the gods. So translate that to modern terms, and you would have a technology that's somehow biometrically activated, the right retina
Right.
scan, the right
Right.
DNA, and so on. So that's the first thing that blew my mind. And the second thing that blew my mind was some of this technology, which was very clearly a technology of mass destruction. This technology that could not be destroyed was hidden. And if we're dealing with a war that occurs in local celestial space long ago, that statement means that that technology may still exist and either be somewhere here on the surface of planet Earth or in some local celestial body, the moon, Mars, and whatever. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, it all ties together very, very well, particularly when you consider the work of people like Dr. Brandenburg, who are talking in terms of a cosmic war,
Right.
due to the traces of the products of fission reactions in the atmosphere of Mars, and trace elements that exist in such quantities that they could only have been the result of nuclear reactions. And that would mean nuclear explosions, nuclear bombs. So yeah, you fit it all together, and you're looking at a cosmic war in the antiquity of prehistory.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'm sure, like I said, I'm just an everyday guy from Kansas originally. People like, okay, that's great, but who was these people? Who did this? Who created this? Who saw this?
Who did all this?
Yes, it's like it can't be just little old human beings, because we were just Neanderthals back in the day. So.
Well, maybe not. That's another part of the story that I cover in a different book called
Okay.
Genes, Giants, Monsters, and Men. But if you look at the texts themselves, it's the gods, all right? But if you look at the gods, particularly in those Mesopotamian texts, the Egyptian texts, it's very clear that they are being thought of in very humanoid terms, or as I like to put it, in terms of being our genetic cousins. So in other words, even though Homo sapiens sapiens as a species may not have arisen until about 200,000 years ago or so, there appear to have been some sort of intelligent members of the genus Homo that were here. And you get into all of these Mesopotamian stories about how modern man was basically a genetic creation, genetically engineered into existence, that I explore in other books. But if you look at the war itself, it's very clear that the gods are all fighting each other. It's kind of a family civil war in the pantheon of gods. And the illustration I like to make of this is to compare it to World War I. What did you have in World War I? You had Kaiser Wilhelm II, of course, was the grandson of Queen Victoria. His
Right.
mother was British. He's related by family relationships. He's the cousin of Tsar Nicholas II. He's related to the Habsburgs. He's related to the Bourbons. He's related to the House of Savoy in Italy. So if you look at World War I in a certain way, it's a big family feud.
It sounds like mine.
That, yeah, so, yes, let's start a world war, guys. But anyway, this is what you see going on in these ancient texts, because all the gods, even in the Greek version, all the gods are related to each other, even though they're fighting each other. And it's very interesting in those texts, particularly the Mesopotamian texts, there's the very strong hint or suggestion that what they're fighting the war over is for control of these technologies of mass destruction. So in other words, they're not only fighting with those technologies, they're fighting over the control of them. All right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's the ultimate world hegemony game. If you look at those texts with that kind of context in mind.
Okay, so the text, are they talking about on the Earth itself, or just cosmic, in the universe itself? Because I remember, everybody nowadays watches Ancient Aliens, and we've learned so much from that show, but that there were evidence in like ancient India of a nuclear event. Was that any somewhat connection between these?
Oh yeah, I definitely think
Really?
so.
Okay.
If you had a cosmic war, it stands to reason that some of that technology is going to survive and be used later. It's not just you're talking about the ruins at Mohenjo-Daro,
Yes.
where you see people, literally cooked to death in the streets and the stones melted. There are other places on the planet where you find similar things. There's vitrification in Scotland. There's the Libyan desert glass in the southwest of Egypt. This whole area of the desert that is nothing but glass that appears to have been the result of some sort of nuclear event of some type, because there's no crater. It's not a meteor impact area. There's no crater there. It does appear that something like that happened. And in my thinking, this cosmic war was not only fought in local celestial space, but here on Earth as well. So yeah, it was everywhere basically.
So what is the time frame on this?
In the book, and that's a very critical question. That's a crucial question, because I leave the exact chronology somewhat fuzzy, and I do so deliberately because when you start proposing this type of scenario, you have to line it up with all of the other research that's out there. And the problem is the dates start not fitting with each other. So I leave it in kind of a broad scaffolding for the express purpose, and I state this in the book, that the exact chronological details are going to have to be worked out over time amongst several researchers, and this data set and that data set compared, and certainly the chronology is going to fall. The details of it are going to fall, and that would include my own. But my best guess, because of what some of the texts say and what we're looking at in terms of extraplanetary evidences, my best guess is that Van Flanderen's date of 3.2 million years ago is probably the more likely date for that event rather than 65 million years ago. And the reason why is if you take seriously the findings of researchers like Hoagland, Brandenburg, the people that did all that research on the artifacts on Mars.
Right.
For those artifacts to be 65 million years ago, I think stretches the geological weathering too far. In other words, there wouldn't be enough left of them to recognize them as possible artifacts of artificial construction. So the 3.2 million date looks more plausible to me from that point of view.
That's a long time ago.
That's still a long time
long
ago.
time ago.
Right.
All right. Well, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Joseph Farrell. He wrote an amazing book, and we're talking about it right now: The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics, and Ancient Text. What we're going to do is just take a couple-minute break. We have to, we got to pay our bills, so we got to do a couple commercials. We're going to be back in just a minute, so don't go anywhere. You're listening to Truth Be Told right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. Be right back.
United States Pharmacopoeia, USP, sets the standard for most food supplements and are used in over 95% of all vitamin and mineral supplements in the world. The problem is that these products have never appeared in any living tissue. They're created in laboratories and are not recognizable to the body's metabolism. Grown by Nature products are different because they use renatured ingredients, proprietary blends of essential vitamins and minerals with cofactors of proteins, lipids, and complex carbohydrates. Over 50 studies have been conducted on renatured nutrients, and over 20 have been published in peer-reviewed journals proclaiming their superiority. As a result, Grown by Nature vitamins and supplements are now recognized as simply the best available. Call 877-817-9829. That's 877-817-9829 and order your Grown by Nature products today. We are what we eat, and since we are of nature, we should eat foods in their natural form. Only Grown by Nature offers a full line of renatured nutrients. Call 877-817-9829. That's 877-817-9829 because not all products are grown by nature, but they should be.
You suffer from anxiety, from depression, maybe even chronic pain? Well, listen up. Truth Be Told is going to tell you about a breakthrough program built on over 100 years of therapies used in America's returning veterans to help you successfully overcome PTSD, anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. The secret proven in study after study. Music therapy. The effects of music are nothing short of amazing. From strokes to PTSD, music has been shown to improve the quality of life. Now, one of the latest music therapy programs being used in America's veteran hospitals can be yours to experience for free, at home, and to help your own anxiety attacks, pain, and depression. Or just relax after a hard day. It's called Whole Tones. It takes music therapy to a new level. This revolutionary program makes use of specifically designed frequencies that have been shown to stimulate your body's natural healing power down to a cellular level. If it works for battle-scarred vets, can it work for you? Well, experience it for yourself for free at sweetwholetones.com. Like Tony Sweet, that's SWEET. Go to sweetwholetones.com. Now enjoy the show. All right, we're back, and you're listening to Truth Be Told right here on Universal Broadcasting Network. We're talking with Joseph Farrell. He has written many books, but the book we're kind of focusing on today is called The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics, and Ancient Text. We've had a great conversation on a couple of the texts that he has studied, kind of who wrote these texts, how old the texts are, and now, Joseph, I know writing when you write stuff like this, the scientific community they're always going to have a say in anything you put out. So, what was the feedback from the community once you released your study?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'm not really aware of any.
Oh, what? I'm
Yeah, I'm
surprised.
not really aware. As far as as far as they're concerned, and I myself say this, I'm a hack from South Dakota. I've not had that much response from them, if they're even aware of the book. I do know that Dr. Brandenburg knows of the work. It certainly dovetails with a lot of his thinking. In fact, I'll be meeting with Dr. Brandenburg in a couple of months at kind of a quiet little private symposium. He expressed an interest in attending it because he wanted to talk to me. But other than that, I don't know of any. Again, I don't follow what people say about my books. I write a book and publish it, and I'm on to my next one.
Right.
I don't track what people are saying. I would guess that simply because I'm proposing that 3.2 million year date for all of this, that they would have any number of objections to that. First of all, it flies in the face of standard academic narrative as to when intelligent life appeared on this planet.
Right.
That would be the first one. The other one would be, well, you've got these cuneiform tablets that are dated from say 4000 BC or thereabout, describing something that you're saying took place millions of years ago. How did that story get transmitted, and so on and so forth? And I really don't even attempt to answer that. Again, I'm painting in very broad strokes. What do the texts say? What's the current scientific theory? Can we mesh them together in some sort of coherent picture? I think you can. What might these technologies be? And of course, that would be their other objection. I'm proposing some, in that book, I'm supposing and presupposing some very, very advanced technologies with a science behind it and a civilization behind it. They'd certainly object to that. So there's any number of objections that they might raise.
When you were talking about the text and how it was the description of the technology, the wars, and even the gods, if you look back in just modern day history, some of the movies that I feel that are inspired by these texts, you think about Star Wars, you talk even Star Trek, Transformers, Thor. I mean, if you look, and it almost describes everything you're talking about. It's funny how they had such influence in Hollywood to make these movies.
Well, you mentioned Star Wars, and I'm glad you did.
Hey, that's my segue.
Because Star Wars, most people don't realize that when George Lucas began mapping out the story, the whole storyline,
right?
He hired the comparative mythologist Joseph Campbell to come talk to him. And I think it's because of that influence of Campbell that you see so many allusions in Star Wars, very deliberate allusions to ancient Egyptian lore and myth. The Force is really nothing but a representation of the Egyptian idea of Ma'at, which is their term for the Force. Anakin Skywalker, Anunnaki in Mesopotamia, in other words, the gods that come down to Earth and interfere with human affairs. The Jedi Knights, you've got the Jed Pillar in Egypt, which is this weird technological looking thing in Egyptian hieroglyphics, and on this goes. And then, of course, you have the Death Star. And in the Cosmic War, the big question for me is, what did George Lucas know and when did he know it?
Exactly.
Because I have a picture of the Death Star next to the moon of Saturn that's called Iapetus or Iapetus, all right? And if you look at this moon of Saturn, the resemblances to the Death Star are just too weird to be ignored. Richard Hoagland first pointed that out, years and years ago. And there's a picture of this moon of Saturn that was taken by the Cassini probe from several points of view as it's approaching the planet and so on and so forth. And when you look at Iapetus, right around the equator, there are 3 perfectly parallel grooves. The trench and the Death Star. Then right above it, there's this gigantic crater that looks like the parabola for the Death Star's laser weapon. All right. So in other words, the resemblance is really stunning. I mean, you have to look at it. And when you do, you realize that the Cassini picture was taken long after the Star Wars movie, which nevertheless has all of these allusions to this ancient lore and planet-busting technology. The other strange thing about Iapetus is I put pictures of the edges of this moon of Saturn, and the problem there is they're straight. they're not spherical at all, guys. So, Hoagland theorized, and I think on some pretty firm basis, that Iapetus is an artificial object of some sort. And the weirdest thing about it that he pointed out, and I mentioned this in the book, the weirdest thing about Iapetus is it's at an inclined orbit. In other words, it's not on the plane of the ecliptic of the other moons orbiting Saturn. It's on this kind of inclined orbit. And the weirdest thing about this is if you place the measurements of Iapetus in Sumerian units, okay, they turn out to be whole measures. There's no decimal points. So in other words, it looks like whoever placed it there was using Sumerian units of measure for
Wow.
some very weird
Wow.
reason. So yeah, my problem with the academic narrative is when you start looking at all of these things, they keep piling up and piling up and piling up. So, to my way of thinking, there's too much of a problem with the academic narrative itself. We've got to start realizing that there are things out there that have to be treated, at least examined, from the possibility that they represent a high civilization. There's too much of this stuff on the moon. There's too much of this stuff on Mars.
Right.
That's just, and we don't even need to go to Richard Hoagland. The Soviets were pointing this stuff out,
Long time ago.
all through the 60s and
Yeah.
70s. And the Soviets were even much more daring than Western scientists, because there were articles by Soviet scientists questioning whether or not the moon was some sort of huge spaceship.
Right.
And the reason they did so was just on the basis of plain old celestial mechanics. The moon is in too perfect of an orbit to get there, either by capture, as some scientists think, because if capture took place, you'd end up with an elliptical orbit of the moon. All right. And if it were ejecta from planet Earth billions of years ago, the same thing. You'd have a very different orbital mechanics than you see in the moon. The moon looks like it was parked there.
It does. Yeah. No, I've heard that many times, and wouldn't that be a kick in the balls if all of a sudden somebody popped their head out and go, we're here.
Yeah, we're here. What are you doing here?
Right. Yeah. Well, even if you think about, like I said, when it comes to the movies, at Transformers, that's where a lot of the information was hidden underneath the moon. With the little time we have left, and I definitely want to have you back and talk more about some of your other books, because very fascinating. The Giza Death Star, which I think that's going to be a good one to talk about. But in the little time we have left, I want to know the technology, because even in Star Wars, the Death Star was a destructive force. I mean, if that was fully functional, it showed what it can do. Mm-hmm. Now, do you feel like there could be and still could be something of that caliber on Earth hidden somewhere? Because even if you think about it, I mean, this was a proven fact that Nazi Germany, Hitler, I mean, how many times did he believe in, UFOs and technology, that they searched the world for extraterrestrial technology?
Well, I wouldn't say that they're searching for extraterrestrial technology. I do have to make that correction, but they're certainly looking for something. They're certainly looking for advanced technology of some sort.
You're right.
Left over from ancient times. Certainly, some Nazis believe that. Hitler, I think, is much more of a pragmatist. He just wants power. He doesn't really
true.
care where it's coming from.
That is true.
But yeah, the technology itself, in answer to your question, I think exists somewhere. My suspicion is some of it is probably hidden away on this planet, probably in the Middle East somewhere. I think this is one of the hidden reasons for great powers like Britain, France, Germany, the United States having such an interest in that area, particularly the big French and German archaeological teams that were working for Saddam Hussein. I think they were looking for something. I think that's, and I'm going to sound nuts here, but I think that's the hidden reason that we went into Iraq.
Right.
We went in there to prevent him from acquiring weapons of mass destruction. And everyone's saying and thinking, atomic, biological, or chemical weapons. I think what they meant very deliberately, and they were using, the misinterpretation of the public that they would give that phrase. I think what they were looking for was something ancient. Because again, if you read the Epic of Ninurta, when he's taking inventory of all of these magical stones or crystals or whatever the heck they were, and then saying, well, we're going to hide some of it because it can't be destroyed. Well, the logical place to look, since the text is from Mesopotamia, would be in Iraq.
Right.
All right? I do think, my Giza Death Star hypothesis, the idea that it was a weapon of mass destruction of some sort, based on some very, very weird, arcane physics speculations, and I want to emphasize they are speculations. I think that structure itself, you're looking at the shell of a machine that's survived to this day, because very clearly inside the Grand Gallery there was something inside that structure at one point that has been removed. So yeah, you know, and I'm not the one that came to that conclusion. Zechariah Sitchin came to that conclusion on the basis of texts, and Chris Dunn came to that conclusion based on going to the structure and looking at it with the eyes of an engineer. So in other words, you have two people saying the same thing, but for very, very different reasons. So yeah, I think that there's a technology out there. I think it's very interesting that you see evidence of pyramids on Mars. The question is why? So yeah, the technology's there, and that implies that there was a science that we've either forgotten or
abandoned,
are to a certain extent recovering.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I am so excited that you're on the show, and thanks for sharing your information with us. Go get the book, The Cosmic War, Interplanetary Warfare, Modern Physics, and Ancient Text. You can get that on Amazon. Where else can you pick that up?
You can buy it right off my web store, my website, www.gizadeathstar.com. I have to say that it will still come from Amazon if you order it off my website, but I do get a few little extra pennies.
Oh, there you go. Well, get it off the website, right there on.
So get it off the website.
Yeah, it's right there on the screen. So, thank you so much, Joseph. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on, Tony.
And you got it. And we're going to have you back. We have a lot more to talk about. All right. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have so much more to talk about. And you can check our website at truthbetoldwebtv.com. Check out our YouTube channel, subscribe, leave a comment, and on iHeartRadio and iTunes. We're all over the place. So until then, we'll see you next time.